Biden wins, then they're here with their champagne and their vegan cheese, and they're just partying and eating MDMA. But like the other side of that coin is these exact same people would have been literally tearing New York City apart.
Welcome to the Punching Down Podcast with your host, Danny Polischuk.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to episode 35 of the Punching Down Podcast. This is a real one. The last episode, it's kind of a half episode. I was debating not even, I actually took it down. I was debating not even putting it up. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put it up for everybody who wants to listen to it right away. Because it was just too in the middle of all the shit going down. I recorded it last week on like Wednesday. There was like, it looked like Biden was going to win, but you were like, who knows and whatever. So we have a little bit more clarity now. And so we can do a proper episode of the podcast. It's just exciting to say that your new president of the United States is Joe Jorgensen. So give it up for Joe Jorgensen, everybody. No, Biden, they're saying Biden's winning, but you know what? I don't know. I don't know if it's just all the distrust that's been sown over the past many years, but I don't, like, all my friends on the left, which is pretty much all of them. They are jubilant. They are excited. It's like kind of like when Obama won. They are really pumped. And for whatever reason, I feel like there is just a chance. There's still a chance that Trump, because it's like, I know it's such a hacky cliche thing to be like, what else does 2020 have in store for us? But honestly, could you just not see Trump by some sort of shady thing, or, you know, by the fact that he installed all these right-leaning Supreme Court justices? I don't know. And they're talking about all this fraud and shit. So everybody's just like, oh, it's a done deal. Biden's in. And I'm like, I'm not positive about that. I'm not completely. And you know what? The crazy thing is, it's like, so on the betting side, so I talked about this last week. So on all, like, you know, the Predict It and sites like that. So Trump was like not a huge underdog, but he was a small underdog to win. Less of an underdog than he was in 2016. And then election night, he slowly starts creeping up, and then it goes even money, and then which is basically like, you know, a coin flip. You know, it's the same odds on both sides. And then he becomes a huge favorite, like a massive favorite, only to basically then, and he went basically like, you know, when I went to sleep that night, he was a huge favorite. I wake up the next morning, and now he's a massive underdog, and everybody's like, it's just a lock. Biden's taking it, and it happened just like that. And then it got to the point where, like, I hadn't really been looking at the odds, but like Trump was like a massive, massive underdog. But now I just looked, and like the betting sites, and I mean, I guess, you know, because it hasn't been called. It's not like just because like Fox News or CNN says Biden won doesn't necessarily mean, like, you know, the whatever election officials say that when they're still counting the votes, they're just, you know, they make these predictions based off of information. I'm sure most of the time they're right. But anyways, as of now, Trump's like a 12% chance to still win this, which, again, and I mentioned this on the previous episode, if you play poker, for example, 12% chance might not seem like a lot. It happens all the fucking time. So all I'm saying is, who knows with this? I wouldn't be surprised. That's all I'll say about that, is that I would not be surprised if somehow, you know, he gets fucking Giuliani. Although that's a tough one, though. You're like, considering his lawyer is Giuliani, and you're like, I don't know, the Four Seasons. So if you don't know the whole Four Seasons thing, this is like one of the funnier things that's occurred for at least the Trump campaign, because he definitely always gave the air that he was in charge, even if he wasn't. And they're not very good, that side of just, you know, saying, whoops, we screwed up. So a couple days ago, Trump was like, we're giving a speech to basically challenge, because they're basically challenging every state that they lost. They're saying there's election fraud, which maybe there's no way to know. Like as a regular person, as someone who like I just I go and I read news sites on the right. Read news sites on the left. I read news sites in the middle. I read people's tweets. I go through like I'm trying to parse all this information, but it's just impossible because like there's just so much misinformation on there. But so anyways, they're claiming that there's all sorts of improprieties. There's voting machines were hacked and like and you read all this stuff, but you're like stuff you read just ends up becoming a couple days later when someone's like, oh yeah, that gets debunked. But it's like the misinformation is being created faster than it can be debunked, and sometimes like you read the misinformation on what you think are trusted news sites, and then sometimes you read them and you thought they were on trusted news sites, but they never were, but they just kind of get lumped in like this is like a perfect one where there was like a bunch of tweets started going around saying Joe Biden was talking to Dick Cheney of all people about when he takes over or whatever, he's going to be talking to Dick Cheney about helping him with I don't know whatever foreign policy, because Dick Cheney only killed I don't know how many fucking millions of brown people, but they're talking about that, and then that just started going around as that was just a fact that Joe Biden is and you read it and it's it might be something so much as like someone who I trust, who's not a news source, but I consider them trustworthy. I follow them on Twitter. I read that and then I'm like, oh, that's crazy. And then all of a sudden it gets debunked and they're like, yeah, that's complete bullshit. That didn't happen. And then like I read some write up on it where it was like literally some random Twitter account with like 1,000 followers just tweets, yeah, Dick Cheney's going to be helping Biden with foreign whatever, and then like all of a sudden like it's just people all over are just talking about it like it's a fact. So I don't know what the fuck's going on. I'm gonna just wait and see. That is kind of my stance on all of this, is that you kind of just have to sit back and wait. But what I'm definitely, I was gonna say I'm definitely not celebrating, but I would have never celebrated. I just don't care really one way or the other. Like, a lot of people are vested. So this is the funny thing. This is the way I found out that Biden was elected. And again, when we say elected, you're like, it's just, Fox News and CNN called it, which is funny because like everybody's like Fox News is the Republican arm and CNN's the Democratic arm or whatever. But Fox News has been going pretty hard against Trump. Like, there was a clip today where Kayleigh McEnany or whatever the fuck her name is, she was talking about all this like voter fraud, and they literally just like cut away from her. And like the guy, I think it was Neil Cavuto, was like, yeah, he's like, we can't just let her say this stuff because there's no proof of this. But they're opening up legal challenges and just, who knows? It's like, the people who think it's impossible at this point for him to pull it off, I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, so I was sleeping. I had a long night Friday night. I'm sleeping and I'm having this weird dream where I was actually dreaming where I was back in university. I think it was like a place I lived in university. I don't remember it that well, but I remember I heard all this like just this like cheering or whatever. I remember, and it's like in my dream, I'm like hearing this cheering, and then I like look out my window in my dream, and there's like the whole football team from my college or whatever, and they're just cheering, and I'm like, what the fuck? And then I wake up and I'm hearing actual cheering, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, why are people cheering? And to the point where like it's so weird to hear cheer, like just to hear like celebration in the street, that I just really didn't even know what to make of it. I was such in daze, and I'd been up pretty late the night before, and I got pretty drunk, and I was just like, didn't know what was going on. And then I was like, oh, Biden must have won. He must have won. And then so that's how I found out. And then I went and I opened my phone or whatever. I'm like, oh, they gave it to Biden. And people were going crazy. Like, I went to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I live close to there, but on the other side of the East River. So I went into Williamsburg and like for the day, and people were like, I'm walking around and everybody just has champagne bottles. Like, it was crazy. Every single person, you would just look at every person and they're having champagne bottles. And, it kind of gives me like the Falcons Patriots vibe a bit, like it's like they were on the field ready to pop bottles. And then you're like, yeah, but well, I mean, I guess we'll see. Maybe it wasn't premature, but, everybody had everybody had champagne bottles. Like, it was crazy. And so we're just like, whatever. We're walking around, and then oh yeah, sorry, I'm totally got off track here. I'm gonna double back, but so with the champagne bottles. But before I go back, as I was talking about Giuliani, I was been on a tangent there. But so yeah, so Giuliani, they this is weird for me to even come back to this, but so they had this press conference to talk about all this impropriety or whatever, and then the press conference, it was like, we're having a press conference at 11 a.m. at the Four Seasons and in Philadelphia, and then whoever booked it, who I imagine is now fired unless it was like Rudy Giuliani himself, booked the Four Seasons. It's a place called Four Seasons Total Landscaping, which is literally a landscaping company in between a crematorium and like a sex shop, in like not even like a strip mall. It's like in an industrial park. Like, it was crazy. And so then they had to basically, and then the Four Seasons in Philadelphia was like, hey, just so you know, like, this press conference is not at the Four Seasons. And then so they ended up having to do this. It was the saddest thing, because especially like when you're contesting and you're like, we're so smart, we're getting to the bottom of this. And then they're in this fucking parking lot in front of a landscaping company. It was not a good look for them. The landscaping company had fun with it, though, because that's the thing. They probably knew when they were like, yeah, the Trump campaign they just called us to do a press conference here. And, they do have that like middle America vibe where they will do stuff like that, but they're not going to do that in Philadelphia. Like, they would do that in Iowa or Ohio or Pennsylvania, but they're not doing that shit in specifically the city of Philadelphia. But they were like, probably, I'm sure they were offered some money. They're like, hey, well, we'll give you $5,000 or something. And they're like, oh, we're not going to turn down $5,000. So then they just let them come, and it was just, they had to go through it. And then the landscaping company started taking all this heat. People are like, I can't believe you would do it. And they're like, what are they supposed to do? They're like, it's the president of the United States office called. And you're like, yeah, why don't you go fuck yourself, pal? But then they started selling some swag, like hats and stuff. Like, one of them was Lawn and Order. Pretty good. Lawn and Order. Whoever thought that up. I'm sure they sold a few hundred of them. But yeah, so that was that's what I meant to get to before I got super off track. But yeah, so anyway, so back to Brooklyn. So everybody's got champagne bottles, and then we were looking to go, partake in the the fun or whatever, because it's like, it's very bandwagony, especially for me. Like, the closest thing I can personally compare it to is I was living in Toronto when the Raptors won the NBA Finals. But I'm actually like a really big fan of theirs, so I definitely wasn't a bandwagon guy at all. But it's like, they won, and there's a million people out in the streets in a city of like a few million or whatever, like 4 million. There's like a million people in the street. It was crazy. But, a lot of people, it's the collective effervescence, as they say. You just want to be caught up in the moment or whatever. So we went out. We went out to Brooklyn, to McCarran Park, which is like the big like Williamsburg park. It was fucking packed. Tons of people there. Not really many people wearing masks. Lots of like DJ, or like a bunch of, it was like basically like a music festival. It was the closest thing to a music festival that you would see this year. There was like, there were separate areas of the park and like different types of music. There were like all these like DJs like running around like on buses, like a literally like a school bus would like roll down the street with like a DJ, and like people are like standing on the roof, and there'd be like rails and stuff so they could like stand, and people were pumped. Because that's the thing, it's like Brooklyn. It's like, I can't imagine people were like, there was huge celebrations like that in fucking, Florida or whatever. Like, I don't imagine places in Florida, but this is like one of the most liberal places in maybe the world. Like Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, or maybe not in the world, but at least in New York. So, but yeah, people were going crazy. It was definitely a super spreader event, except for that it's not technically a super spreader event because they're not Trump supporters. Because imagine Trump won and then there was an equivalent thing. Like, literally the news would just be going nuts for it. But because it was, in their minds, toppling. I saw a tweet about this where someone's like, yeah, this wasn't like celebrating a new president. We toppled a dictator. And you're like, get the fuck out of here with that ridiculous nonsense, toppling a dictator. I mean, he's a shitty president. But he's not a dictator. But anyway, so people were going crazy. And it was funny too, because like I was there with Ryan Long and a couple other friends, and we were kind of saying how it's like all these people, it's like hippies. It's like you're almost like at fucking Burning Man or some shit. They're all like, doing fire sticks and like they're doing hula hoops and there's like a million bicycles. And you're like, if these people, like these people's night, like if Trump won, like if Biden wins, then they're here with their champagne and their vegan cheese and they're just partying and eating MDMA. But like the other side of that coin is these exact same people would have been literally tearing New York City apart. They would have been smashing Targets and like pulling down statues. Like that energy had to come out for them in some capacity. And that was, I guess, just thankfully a positive one. And it's funny too, because the narrative obviously before the election, like even my mom was like, she's like, make sure on the night of election, like don't go outside. You got to worry. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, the only concern about going outside is if Trump wins. Like right-wing people they do not have a history of like looting and tearing shit down. The most they do is they show up to places with guns and then they try and like start shit. But like, they'll try and get someone to like, start a fight with them so then they can fight or whatever. But they don't just instigate shit, and they definitely don't loot. That is not their style to loot. But anyway, so many people were like, oh, aren't you worried? I'm like, no. I'm like, first off, they'll only be looting in New York City if Trump wins. And he didn't, at least so far he didn't. But it's funny, lots of places, they're not taking down the boards. Like the Target by my house, and I've seen photos of Washington, D.C. and all over the place. And they're not taking down the boards. And honestly, I don't blame them, because if somehow Trump snatches this away at this point, like, again, it's based on the odds, the betting odds, 12% chance that it happens. If he does that, all those people who were high on MDMA and having the time of their life, drinking champagne, popping bottles, celebrating, are going to possibly be the angriest people, the angriest group of people that has ever taken to the streets of New York City or any liberal place. Because obviously they're not going to go to like any sort of like Republican strongholds. But like New York City is going to be on fire for like, it's going to be worse than 9/11 probably. Like they are going to fucking go nuts. The only thing that I can kind of relate to this is I was at Game 5 of the NBA Finals, back to the Raptors. I was at Game 5 of the NBA Finals last year when the Raptors won that season. But so Game 5, the Raptors were up 3-1 in the series, so they were like, they just needed one win, and they won the NBA Finals. And the game was they were losing in the fourth quarter, and then they went up by like 6 points with like 3 minutes to go, which a 6-point lead in basketball with 3 minutes to go is nothing. Like I've seen teams give away a 10-point lead with a minute to go. So it's like, it's not much, but everybody there, you could start feeling like a real energy where you could really be like, oh my God, like we're about to win this. Like everybody, like I remember like turning to a guy I was beside and I was like, oh my God, like we're about to win the NBA Finals. Like this is crazy. Like it was absolutely electric. Like that's the only way to even describe it. It was like the energy was insane. It was electric. Everybody was like, strangers literally like hugging and jumping up and down. We're like, oh my God, we're about to win it. And then I don't remember exactly who scored, but I think it was like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson. Someone hits a 3-pointer right at the end of the game. Raptors lose. And just like a vacuum, the air just gets sucked out of the building. And I remember they were giving all those games, they would give away free T-shirts, right? And so everybody had a free T-shirt. And as we're leaving the building, and that was like, it was so funny that night too, because like I was at the game, and then like I progressively got drunker because I was like, we're about to party. Like I'm gonna start this shit early. That was like one of the sadder things too, because we're about to start this shit early. I was getting drunker and drunker, and then we're just like, it ends, and you're like kind of drunk, and they lost, and there's nothing to celebrate. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one. And then it was probably like a Tuesday night or something. And then we're like walking out of there, and people were just like, it was like real anger. Like people were like you're like, we're still up 3-2 in the NBA Finals, but people were like legitimately like, they were angry because they had what felt like a win stolen from them. Like people were like taking the T-shirts and they were throwing them in the fucking garbage and stuff. And they were like kicking stuff. Like people were mad. They were very mad. Now, And I said to myself, too, I remember, I'm like, if the Raptors somehow go from having a 3-1 lead in the series and they lose the series, because the next game was in Golden State, and then if they lost that game, then you're like, you have a game 7. And at that point, I would probably have to take Golden State just with their, like, you know, their history or whatever. And you're like, if the Raptors somehow lost this whole series, I'm like, Toronto would burn to the fucking ground. Anyways, my point being is if somehow Trump pulls this off, and if on January 20th or whatever the fuck day it is, I think it's January 20th. I don't know if they inaugurate. Is there inauguration for the same president? I don't know. That I'll have to look into. I think there is, though. But anyways, if there's a scenario where he gets inaugurated on January 20th, that'll be an absolute fucking nightmare for this country. I mean, at least for half of it. I mean, half of it will be loving it, but the other half will not be good. Let's just say they're not going to be good sports about this loss, because again, they're going to feel like basically currently the Republicans feel like it's being stolen from them. At least many do, not all of them, but there are an element where they're like, you know, they're stealing the election from us. And the Democrats are like, yeah, sorry, you lost. And it's so funny too, because like literally the past 4 years, like I don't even think the Democrats even still consider Trump's win legitimate. Like his current term, even though he's almost done, they still don't consider that a legitimate thing. And then now he's being like, well, Biden's win is not legitimate, and they're like, oh yeah, no, it is. Like they're not even willing to indulge that. And I mean, I understand a part of it is the fact that just Trump has been literally telegraphing this whole thing. Like he's been saying for months that he's like, yeah, I'm not going to accept the results of the election because it's going to be an unfair election. And he's been saying that he's going to do this, and now he's doing it. But it's just so funny that like how quickly like the dissonance with people where you're like, you have been for the last 4 years saying how there's meddling in our elections and that how people are meddling and that there's a potential for unfair elections. And the moment it swings the other way, they're just like, oh, no, that's not possible this time. It happened with you for sure, 100%. But for us, there's just no possibility of it. And I get it. They want to be the winners. Nobody wants to be on the losing side. They want to be on the winning side. So that's how they're thinking of it. But fuck, that'll be a messy one. If Trump somehow manages to pull it off, I will be laughing. I will think it'll be very funny. I'll be locked in my home for sure. Thankfully I live on a high floor, high enough. But that's the thing too. They're the Trumpers. They're getting mad because it's interesting too. Because people are like, "Oh, this is the biggest landslide ever. The most amount of people ever voted for a winning president, which is Biden. I think 74 million, and Trump got 70 million votes." And people are like, "Wow, that's a landslide. 4 million people voted for Biden." But you're like, "Yeah, but the country's like 30 or 40 million people. Like, it's only like an extra 1%. Like, it's really, really fucking close. Like, as much as that is literally 4 million people, although if you ask the people on the right, they're like, yeah, those are 4 million dead people or whatever. This shit's going to drag on. I find it very difficult to believe that we're going to actually have like an actual official new president soon. I don't feel it. I could be wrong, obviously. I could be really wrong. I know that I've been seeing some stuff online, which is pretty funny. Like, just their hats are flipping. Like, they're honestly going the opposite way. Like, so remember there was like Trump won, and then they had like the Million Man March, and now there's a Million MAGA March, which I'm curious to see how many people actually show up for this. But they're saying like there's going to be a Million MAGA March where people go to Washington, D.C., like 1 million plus Trump supporters to go support the president and, contest this illegitimate election. Whole thing's a fucking mess. But I guess we'll see how it shakes out. Funny thing too, today they're all of a sudden they're like, hey, guess what? We have a COVID vaccine that's 90% working. Pfizer came out with that today, which obviously is just such a kick in the dick to Trump. And people are like, there's just so many conspiracy theories too now. Like everything is just seen through the lens of a conspiracy theory because they come out and they say, oh, it's 90% effective, which is like way higher than they thought. And then all these people are like, oh, convenient that you wait like 2 days after Trump's or loses or whatever, Biden wins to name or to come out with the COVID vaccine just to like not give him credit for it or whatever. I don't even know what the thoughts on it are, but they did that, and so who knows the way lots of stocks were going in the stock market. It seems like maybe the COVID is over soon, but then you read all these people and they're like, yeah, it's COVID's not over soon. There's going to be a lot of crazy shit going down in the next couple months. That was the thing too. Everybody thought they're like, oh yeah, just once the election's over, that's that. We're just gonna get to go back to how it used to be, minus the whole COVID part. It's gonna be 2015 all over again, just with a massive pandemic. And then you're like, nope, not. I mean, there is an energy that does feel a bit like stuff has changed, but not really. Not really at all. Like nothing, even today, because there was this idea that once Trump was out of office, then all these politicians who felt like they were trying to get even with Trump a bit would be like, for example, de Blasio or Cuomo, where I live, would be like, all right, they would ease restrictions because they weren't trying to fuck him over. But even today, de Blasio was like, yeah, we're going to have to start looking at closing restaurants back up and all this shit. So not doing great. Not doing great. It was an interesting election too, like seeing all the demographics and stuff. Like they announced that Trump got the highest amount of minority votes since 1960 for, I guess, a Republican, obviously, which is interesting because everybody was like, this guy's a fucking racist Klansman or whatever, all this shit, and then minorities came out and voted for him. I don't know if there's a really good explanation. Some people think it was because many of them are like, in Florida, all the Cubans who don't want to go back to socialism because he basically was threatening. They're like, oh, you vote for Biden, you're going back to socialism. But it is interesting that that's kind of how it shook out. And it is interesting, too, that like since 1960, you're like, there were no... Like, how many minorities voted, period, like back then? Like, I'm curious what the minority makeup of the United States was in 1960 and before. It must have been tiny. It must have been like a very heavily majority white country. But anyways, it's a small win for Donald Trump. He's definitely not going to that's the thing. He's not going to go away. Like if he loses this election and he concedes it, which I just cannot see any scenario that he does, he will be campaigning nonstop for the next 4 years. It's going to be a fucking nightmare. The only thing that I can think of that maybe happens is that because he's the president of the United States, Twitter has held off on just deleting his account because they're like, I'm sure he's done plenty of things to warrant it, and they're just like, you know what, we're not going to delete his account because he's the president, and that would just be a nightmare. And he has all sorts of power, but the moment he's out of power, I could see him just tweeting one fucking thing, and he's just like, bam. Zapped. And then everybody's gonna go on Parler. That's so funny. Everybody's like, go to Parler. They've been saying that for months. Go to Parler. It's like the worst fucking app. Hey, guess what? It turns out it's really hard to put together a social media app, and it requires a lot of people and tons of money. But yeah, so that's how that's going. Kamala Harris. I haven't seen it yet with Biden, but Kamala Harris, she changed her pronouns. This was a big thing. She updated her Twitter bio. She has her pronouns in her bio now, which I imagine she's the first vice president to do that, because I can't imagine Joe Biden had that when he was vice president, and then that thing didn't even exist. Like, I don't even know, did that exist? Did pronouns like the whole pronoun debate, like that's how crazy that is. The pronoun thing is like, I'm like, Obama's first term, like I don't even, Obama, when he came in, I don't think Twitter existed, or maybe it had just started. I don't know if he had a Twitter account. And then maybe in his second term, he probably had a Twitter account for sure at that point. Second term, that would be like 2012, 2016, he had a Twitter account. But I don't think the whole pronoun thing even existed as a concept. Like maybe it did in like the fringes of the gender world. So Biden definitely has never had pronouns in his bio. And then, but Kamala, you can't say Kamala, it's Kamala. She updated her pronouns because she's cool as shit. She's just like one of the kids, and but I don't know if Biden will do that because, I'm sure someone will take over his Twitter account, but he's not going to do it because he probably doesn't know what the fuck those pronouns even mean. Like, imagine Joe Biden is like, I'm Joe Biden, he, him pronouns. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Makes zero sense. Let's see. I'm just checking right now. President-elect, husband to Dr. Biden, proud father, grandfather, ready to build back better for all America. Yeah, so no, he only has 18 million followers. Trump is like 80 million. But yeah, anyway, so he hasn't put his pronouns in his bio, which means he's a bad person. And that's pretty fucked up that the president-elect would not put his pronouns in his bio. What are the odds that Trump ever puts his pronouns in his bio? Never. He's like, I'm sure he's like, yeah, that's nonsense. But again, who knows? He's president-elect, but maybe he gets it snatched away. Because, because that's the thing. There's all these lawsuits going on, and I wouldn't put it past me. It wouldn't be the craziest thing to happen. There are a few funny things that I've been seeing, election-wise. So this was a great one. This is just stuff you come across on Twitter when I'm preparing for the podcast. I mostly do it on Twitter, and so then you see just funny little like interactions. So here's a guy. His name's Gene Wu. I think he's a politician because his Twitter handle's @Gene for Texas. So he did a then and now, and it's like a photo, 2 photos side by side. The first one is that iconic like end of World War II or whatever photo where it's like a sailor is like kissing a black and white, and he's kissing a woman in the street. And then beside him is I don't know if it's a mixed race couple, but it's definitely at least a black couple. The guy's black. I can't tell if the woman is. Maybe she's some kind of thing. And it says then and now, right? So it's like the difference then and now, but basically comparing it to like the end of the war, this big celebration. And then someone replies to Gene, and it says, Gene, sorry to pull your fave is problematic, but this picture, though famous, was non-consensual. They did not know each other. The sailor simply grabbed this woman and kissed her without permission. Which is like, sure, but he's not like condoning that behavior. He's trying to make a point, a stupid point at that. He's literally trying to compare the end of World War II, I think it was World War II, to Trump losing. Like, imagine like trying to compare the end of the bloody war to like Biden taking out Trump. And then she's like, excuse me, this was non-consensual. And you're like, hey, guess what, bitch? Consent didn't exist back then. That was not a thing. There was no consent. It's like, but she's like, yeah, but it wasn't non-consensual. And you're like, yeah, well, there was no such thing as consent. So, hate to break it to you, lady, but it is funny because both of those people are dumb. This is actually a really interesting thing too, because I was talking about the fake news stuff earlier, with like, you know, how do you know it's true, and like the thing with Dick Cheney or whatever. So this is actually a crazy fucking stunt that they would even do this. But so to, I guess, keep morale up in the Team Trump headquarters, it's a guy from Tim Murtaugh, but it's basically to keep morale up and to basically, you know, remind the Trump staff that they're like, look, you know, the media doesn't select the president, the voters select the president, and this isn't over. So it was newspaper, like front page of a newspaper, and it was like taped up all over, and it says President Gore, right, on it, and it says Gore over the top with bare majority. Right, so that's in the Washington Times. It says election special bear, and because obviously Gore did not win, it went to the Supreme Court or whatever. But then it turns out that was a completely fake newspaper. It's like, because like then they went and they got the actual newspaper, and it says President Bush, Texan over the top with bare majority. So basically, the Trump campaign was like, hey, guess what? The media doesn't select the president. Then showed a fake newspaper where the actual newspaper did select the president and was correct. And then they had to like delete it because they're like, this looks fucking insane. Like, I get wanting to be like, you know what, let's try and boost some morale here, folks. But this was just not the way to do it. Or maybe it was, who knows? I mean, I can't see them like at this point needing like a morale boost. You're like, look, you're going to fucking do a bunch of your legal challenges. Maybe you're going to win. Maybe you're going to not. Oh, yeah, this dude's director of communications for real Donald Trump. Tim Murtaugh. So, you got that going on. And then we have a couple more things. Oh, yeah, this was just a classic example of people just like instantly kind of like, you know, on both sides, basically just like, you know, you do something and it's like so clear. Like just, I guess, I don't even know, like just being partisan or whatever, but it's like this guy, Aaron Rupar, who like, he just takes tons of shit on Twitter because he has some of the worst takes. So SNL was delayed for the Notre Dame game, and there's all these people on the field after the game ended, and it said he writes, not ideal during a worsening pandemic, and then literally like, you know, slightly earlier it's like it's party time outside the White House as Biden is elected 46th president. And it's like, dude. And again, he's just like, oh, in my defense, he's like, there were a lot more masks at the White House than on the football field. And you're like, dude, it's like, just if you're gonna be a partisan person, just lean into it. Why do you gotta be so glaringly hypocritical? It seems ridiculous. Okay, and then last thing, because this is so funny. So this dude, televangelist Kenneth Copeland, this was on this Twitter. He's a televangelist, so he's obviously insane. So the media declaring that Joe Biden has won the election and will become president. This is televangelist Kenneth Copeland laughs at the media for declaring that Joe Biden has won the election and will become president. This is one of the most unhinged, crazy things I've ever seen / heard. So I'm going to play it for you now.
The media said what? The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha
Now that is just one crazy, deranged old man losing his fucking mind. But it's honestly, it's one of, you know how laughter is infectious? It is one of those things where laughter really is infectious. Because if you watch it a bunch of times, you'll just start laughing. Not at the fact that he's insane, although you might laugh at the fact that he's insane. There's a few things there, but it's just crazy. I can't wait till we're past the... Actually, we're never going to be out of this. I keep saying, like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. It's never going to be over. And on that note, this is over. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the full election special of Punching Down. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review, subscribe, whatever the fuck, you know how to do it. And I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.